Well, good evening and welcome to session 3, the final session of Line Render 9000. We're here with Jonathan, who is the creator of Line Render 9000. I'm Sean Hancox from Meshology, and we're talking about how to add color to your line art that is generated through Line Render 9000. Jonathan, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Sean. So maybe we should start by pulling up the line art that we generated in the previous session, and then have an example of what we're working with, and then we'll start adding color and seeing what kind of effects we can achieve.
Sounds like a great idea. So here's the last line art comp that we did.
So this image is a composite of, I think we have four images or 4 different render passes on top of each other. So we have the outlines, which I usually call the color ID pass, they come from having different colors that all get outlines around them. And that, in our case, is going to be lines, from all the different colors from this render are different outlines. So in this case, it's the woman, her dress, the kind of belt area in her dress, the hair, and then her eyes. Another one is the line output from the Fresnel reflected V. So the Fresnel reflected V lines is detail lines. Then we have edge blend lines, which are also detailed lines. And then the very, very last thing we did was add some lighting to the scene and get the shadow opacity pass, which gave us a main render, which was really the shadows in the scene, only the shadows, and we also got an outline render because we rendered it with the Line Render 9000 script, which gave us outlines, and those two we flattened together to make one image, and the reason for that was so that the edges of the shadows would be more anti-aliased. So that's where we ended up.
And then we composited all the layers together so the final image looks like this.
All right, so I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about the shadow opacity cam for a minute, because there's a couple of features that you can do using that maybe people don't know about. So if you don't mind, let's go back to DAZ Studio and let's take a look at the settings on the shadow opacity camera in the main studio area. And then shadow color threshold. Okay, so note how shadow color threshold is this kind of medium gray, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
What the shadow opacity cam does is it will render out more or less a black and white image of only the shadows that are in the image. And then in order to get it to be more of a cartoon look, it's converting it to black and white. So there's a certain threshold for the shadow color. And when it gets so dark, because when 3D light normally renders like the shadows, it's like a soft blend. It blends from like the darkest color of the shadow and gets less and less black, or whatever the shadow color is. It gets less and less of that color and until it kind of fades. You don't have those crisp black lines like you would in like an inked cell shaded style artwork. So this camera is intended to be used for more of a cartoon style image, and that shadow color threshold is the cutoff point for how dark it is, where it should be all black.
Okay.
So what we could do if we wanted to was we could increase the size of the shadows by changing the shadow color threshold to be a little bit lighter, closer to white. Then we would have bigger shadows. And if we wanted to have smaller amount of shadow, then we could make the shadow color threshold a little bit closer to black. Okay, so here we're going to change the color threshold to be a little bit lighter, a little bit closer to white. So let's go up to somewhere in the 180s, I think should probably be good. Now, the effect of this change should mean that when deciding whether or not the shadow should be black or white, if it's lighter than this color, it will be white or transparent, and if it's darker than that color, it will be the shadow color. So the shadow color right now is pure black. If you wanted to get artistic, you could change shadow color to be a different color, like purple or pink, and then your shadows are going to come out purple or pink. So that's what the shadow color parameter does. All right, let's give this guy a render, just the shadow opacity pass. And once again, the reason for merging them together is to effectively anti-alias the shadows. So the main render is going to change the pixel color itself to be pure black or pure white, or pure opacity, I should say. When merging the lines in there, the lines sort of act as a anti-aliasing, because the lines are somewhat anti-aliased, so they look like a line. They don't look super jagged.
So what we have here now is here is the original shadow opacity cam pass, the entire figure, and here is the one that we just rendered, which is showing only half of the image in the darker shadows. So for example, if I show the entire picture, so the one that we just rendered and the one that was previous, overlaying the two with the mask so that you can see down the middle.
I'm not seeing much of a difference again. Yeah, another possibility is that there just aren't shadows that are bigger. Another possibility, of course, is the shadow softness might not be there. So
It's changing ever so slightly. You can see with the line in the center, you can visually see.
oh yeah,
Just
that's true. Yeah, you can see it mostly in the hair, where the hair has more nooks and crannies, so that makes sense. So since the skirt's kind of, it is what it is as far as the light and the shadow that's happening there, but in the hair there's a lot more shadows to be had, so that's why we're seeing a difference. Okay, so you can experiment with that in your own time with the shadow opacity cam. That's what those two settings do. The other things that matter for getting shadows in a toon style render to be different is to actually play with your lighting itself. So we can take a quick look at those settings and how to affect the way that the shadows look in the resulting render. So to do that, we'll switch back to DAZ Studio, and then we'll go to our spotlight and to the properties, or the parameters tab of the spotlight. And then, yep, and now we'll go down to the light parameter group. And underneath that, we should have a parameter called shadow. And here we can choose the shadow color and some other things. So here, interestingly, the shadow type is none, which is kind of not what I was expecting. I typically will change shadow type to ray traced, software only. And then here you can decide how intense you want the shadows. So in our case, we're really not getting tons and tons of shadows, but if we wanted to get even less shadows, we could turn down the shadow intensity. Also, right now in our scene, the shadow softness is at 0%, which means that in a photorealistic, quote unquote, render, the shadows are going to decay very, very quickly. So it's going to be black and then it's going to be not black. And in realistic scenes, shadow softness tends to be a little bit higher. I generally play with it in the 20% radius, although shadow softness doesn't really do us any good if we're going for an inked look in our final scene. So shadow softness being 0 in our case is probably fine. If we wanted to tone down the shadows, we could change shadow intensity to be a little bit lower. But in our case, I think the shadows are appropriate for our picture. But those would be the parameters that we could play with if we wanted to affect the way that the shadows looked in our resulting image.
All right.
Okay, now let's start playing with color. So one of the ways to approach coloring a cartoon style scene is to use the cartoon camera that comes with Line Render 9000. So that's in our case let's add another camera to our scene. Right now we have the Tune two-tone cam, which actually does create kind of an interesting effect. Let's play with that first. They're both kind of variants of each other, the Tune cam and the Tune two-tone cam. So when we were talking about the shadow opacity cam, what the shadow opacity cam did is it rendered out the shadows by themselves, and then it decided, so we would have had a white and black image, and then from there it decided that this area is dark enough that it should be all black, and this area is light enough so it should be transparent. So the shadow opacity cam rendered out kind of a simplified version of the scene, only showing shadow maps, and then simplified it down into two colors that were distinct. Similarly, the Tune two-tone cam will render out the image in a cartoon style, and what I mean by that is that there's inbuilt functionality to kind of have this color blurring and color clamping to make the colors distinct, or sort of to create kind of a cartoon look, like an old cartoon look where they only had a limited set of colors. And then from there, it will convert it into two different colors, most often black and white. So using the Tune two-tone camera, you can create kind of this more of like almost like a Frank Miller style of art, where in this case it will care what your resulting colors of your scene are, whereas most of our other cameras don't, right? Most of our cameras are only really caring about the geometry of the scene, not about the resulting colors. So let's do an experiment with the two-tone camera. Let's just render it out using the two-tone cam.
Camera, let me change my camera back to the scene, the friend that we had.
Yep, good call. It was main camera.
Yep.
It's the one we were using. The Tune two-tone camera, try that with the
This one?
with using the LR9K script instead of the 3Delight script.
And there we go. We can get rid of that one. And if you like, I can put a...
Okay.
That looks amazing.
All right, and let's add the lines in again. I think we're gonna have a similar structure with the where the lines are gonna anti-alias where the color changes from the black to the white.
So add the lines.
So I think we should probably add the line output, and then let's flatten that down into a single layer.
So that's the single output from the two-tone cam and the lines.
Yep. All right, so what happened here? What happened is 3D Light rendered it out as a color image with some color simplification, and then it determined if the resulting image was dark enough or light enough, and then changed it to black or white. So you can see here it's actually picking up the shadows again, and that's because it's picking up the lighting of the scene just like anything else. We could avoid that by going to the 3D Light, the LR9K script, auto render script, and disabling render shadows. That should eliminate the shadows coming in again, which I think we'd probably want to do in this particular scene. But the Tune two-tone cam can be used in order to create kind of that. I'm not sure what the proper artistic term is for it, but the kind of noir, very stark contrast, cell shaded look, where you have the scene kind of in black and white. Where in this case we've got a collection of all of the different line passes that we have to get detail, or at least we could add that in. We don't have that right now into the resulting image. And then in addition, it would care about the colors in the final scene as well. So if the dress was a little bit darker, for example, her whole dress would have been black, or different parts of the scene would end up being either black or white. So it can create kind of an interesting look, especially when combined with the shadow opacity cam and the other lines.
Yeah, I can see that. I quite like this. You're right. It's like a film noir kind of a Sin City, I guess, is the most recent movie that I've seen that employs this kind of a style.
Yes. Let's go back to DAZ Studio, and I'll briefly talk about some of the properties on the Tune two-tone cam. So similar to the shadow opacity cam, there's a couple of color parameters where one of them is the threshold to decide if the resulting color should be the tone 1 or tone 2. And I'm saying it that way because although our resulting image was a black and white image, the camera has outputs to select different colors for what the output colors are. So if you wanted instead to be rendering in blue and pink, you could do that by selecting the values on the two-tone section of the parameters page, to be one to be red and one to be pink.
So down here, for example?
Yep. So right now, the parameters are called light and dark. So right now, light is white and dark is black. So the way that the camera works is it will render out the scene, and then if it's darker than the grayscale threshold, then it will change it to the dark color, which in our case is black. If it's lighter than it, it will change it to light, which is the white color in our parameters here.
That's cool. So let's play. I want to play. So let's
Absolutely.
let's make the light. I like to do opposites. So let's do black, and then let's do the black at a red, and then render it out to see what we get.
Okay, you're at white and red right now, though.
Oh. Black and red. So then we'll render it out. Let's see what we get. That's cool. And if you bring the lines in too, Tune 2 camera, which would be this one, and then composite those or merge them together. That's what it looks like. That's a cool effect.
Yep. So, yeah, this is another tool in the toolbox for for creating kind of interesting artistic effects. So this obviously gets influenced by the your color choices in the scene, as well as your well, if you want to, the lighting. So if you wanted to, for example, get her dress to be all the dark color, you could do that by making her dress black in the resulting image or whatever. But it's a way of sort of not having to change the textures in your scene. You can still get kind of an interesting representation of what those quote unquote photorealistic textures would end up being, and it is sort of passable in a cartoon context. In this particular case, I think I'd probably do something about the pattern on her dress, because it's a little bit distracting when we're looking at it from like a cartoon perspective. So I might simplify that to be a solid color of something or another, especially if I was using the Toon Tone cam where the materials didn't matter.
Right. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and go back to the settings. You do have color IDs here, so that means that I could actually go in and define different color IDs. Now this is it's not the main cam. The main camera uses the renders out the color IDs, doesn't it?
Yes. So that's an interesting thought, using color ID materials here, because that would swap in the color IDs that we have selected on all of our things. So then that should make the different color IDs, depending on if they're darker than the threshold or not, it should change them to black and red, I think. Although I have admittedly have not done this experiment.
Well, this is a great time to try it, I think. So so let's leave our grayscale threshold as it is, so 104 all across the board. We've used black, obviously, in portions of it. We can go back and review which portions, obviously. So if we wanted to change her entire dress into black, would make sense to me, I would think. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be fine. So with our current setting of red and black, then we would need to be changing the dress to have a white color ID, I guess.
Or just change it into the... Oh yes, you're right. We couldn't change it into the black, could we? Because it would... Well,
I'm not sure what you're trying to do 100%.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking in terms of color. Like, do I color this like a cell shade, or do I color it in terms of what the 3D light engine or the LR9K is going to interpret as? Well, this is lighter than 104, so it needs to be black. Now, interesting question, I suppose, is this grayscale threshold of 104 across the board. Everything less than 104 becomes black. Everything greater than 104 becomes red. Is that correct?
The reverse, because higher numbers are going to be closer to white. So they would end up being the light color, which in our case is black, in a very confusing way. And then anything lower numbers than 104 would be dark, which is red.
Okay.
So in our case, I think what we should do is turn off the render shadows and see what kind of effect that gives us. Because right now we're kind of doubling up on the shadows. The two-tone camera here is picking up shadows, and we also have a separate shadow pass. So realistically, I wouldn't probably use both.
So just turn off render shadows here.
Yep. And then let's see what that ends up with.
All right.
I'm kind of expecting that we won't see much of a change with regards to the dress, but we will see a change in regards to the shadows.
And merging down. And that's before. Yeah, you're right. There's almost very little difference. Tiny little difference. Mostly noticeable in the hair. See, notice the, there, let's, so this is the most recent pass.
Okay. Yeah, so the reason why we're getting that shadow effect still is because it's rendering out the lights, and the light is coming from that other side, so that's all going to be lighter, which is why we're getting that color.
Okay.
So, yeah, that makes sense. Right, so is there more to say about the two-tone camera at this point? I think this bleeds a bit into the tune camera. So let's switch to the tune camera a little bit, and then we'll talk about some of the settings that both of the cameras have, which is the color clamping and the color blending, and then we'll start to get a feel for what the tune two-tone camera does, because it will do all the tune stuff before it does the two-tone rasterization, I guess.
Okay.
So let's load up the LR9K tune camera, and once again we'll need to so here we select the tune camera and go to the parameters page again. So here we have a couple of parameters. We have clamps and clamp blend. So clamps is sort of the number of colors that will get kind of blended together. So I think for interest, let's change clamps to 2, and then let's change clamp blend down to almost nothing. Like, let's change it to 0.
Okay.
Yeah, let's 0. See what happens. All right, so then let's use the LR9K auto render script to render out a tune camera render. So once again, we need to use the 3D or the line render 9000 render script. We're gonna have to add a new pass here.
Okay.
Or yeah, we can just replace
Yeah.
it. That's fine.
Okay.
I think we're okay with all of these settings.
Do you want me to include shadows or leave them?
Now let's leave the shadows off for the time being, and then we probably want to change the file prefix number again, and then hit go, and we'll see what we end up with. All right. All right, so let's take out the camera lines
Okay.
and just look at the tune camera output. Okay, so what we should be observing here is that we kind of have kind of a different artistic effect of the scene, where it rendered it out sort of like a cartoon. There's a couple of things that's interesting. We ended up with kind of this lighting effect, where we can see that where the spotlight's hitting her first, it's a brighter color, and then it in the different areas it changes. But you can see that there's this so-called color clamping, where like on her leg, for example, we have this very clear line where the shadow starts. So the tune cameras that are included with line render are sort of a way of getting a color simplification that you sort of want in cartoons without without too much work. I guess is a way of saying it. We're sort of getting some of the dress texture effect, and we're getting some of the other things. So you can kind of get interesting and passive results, and it honors the original photorealistic textures also. So we haven't really done any changes with regards to the way that the textures look, and we're kind of getting a toony sort of effect. And I think this by itself would probably start looking pretty good if we composite our line art on top of this. Then I think we'll start getting a pretty convincing tune image already.
shadow opacity I'll leave off, I'm guessing.
Nah, turn that on. It'll look good. Although I think we need to drag some of these above the tune image.
Wow. Nice. That's a tune cam. So maybe get rid of that. That's interesting. We've got yeah. Anything else you want me to add? This one here came in. This one, oh, this is the two-tone cam lines. Because we merged it, it converted it from two PNGs into a JPEG, which becomes opaque, which is why we've lost all the detail beneath.
Okay.
What we could do is bring in the camera lines.
Okay.
There's just the cam lines without the... So obviously as soon as you, in Photoshop at least, when you merge them, you lose the transparency of the images. Unless I wasn't paying attention to a box that said, do you want to keep the background transparent? That's cool.
Right. And then in all these cases, we could be doing different effects with the actual lines here. So when we added in the lines from the tune camera, that ended up with kind of giving us these lines, which are pretty stark, that outline where the colors are clamped, right? So we can see the color clamping maybe most noticeably in the hair, where the parts that the light is touching most prominently end up kind of this really light color, like a blonde.
Yep.
And then we have like areas of like a medium brown in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically like white, yellow, and then brown in the hair.
That's neat. So,
and we can see that the color clamping also kind of took effect in other parts of the body. So you can see kind of parts of the hair area ended up getting clamped to the hair color as well.
mm-hmm. So the numbers, I'm going back to DAZ Studio. So the numbers where it says, clamps 2 and clamp blend 0. So the clamp blend 0, I'm assuming, means I want a distinction between a color change. In other words, don't blend the adjoining pixels into this color. Like, don't shade it. I just want a hard line between these two colors.
That's right. That's exactly correct. So,
and the clamps?
So if we wanted to, we could change the clamp blend to be up significantly to 0.2 or 0.3, and then we'll start seeing more of the airbrushed cartoon look where the colors kind of blend from one to the other.
So I changed it to 0.3. Let's try rendering that and see what we get. And I forgot to change my prefix. Yes, smack my fingers.
At some point we should also try rendering it without lights, because I think lights is kind of skewing the image a little bit. I fear that if we uncheck that box we might get a black render, but I think it's for science. We should try it.
All right. I'm for science.
I usually don't merge the lines in
okay.
together because when they're colors, because the lines are going to be coming out with the line color as specified in the render settings, and we have it set to black, right? So the color render or the tune render, I'll just let it be as is, I guess, with the colors. The you, you kind of avoid the aliasing issue that happens because you should have it's expected to be supplemented with the actual line art that's going on around it, right?
Right. Okay.
Okay, so this is kind of a. I mean, this render looks pretty good to me.
Yeah.
You can see that we're not getting as like stark contrast. I think that setting the clamp blending to 0 made us get like this really stark contrast between the white and the black, and we can kind of see that the reason why we got those kind of really light areas on our forehead in the previous one and stuff seem to be caused by that. So this starts to be an okay looking toon render to me. Overall, I think the skin tone is looking pretty good and the shadows are looking pretty good. We kind of got like a 3-tone look sort of on the skin, right? Where we've got the main skin color, which is highlighted by the light hitting it first. And then we have kind of this darker color that's representing kind of the shadow area.
Yeah.
And then we also have a pure black shadow pass
Yeah.
as a different layer on top of that. That kind of gives us a 3-tone effect, sort of. Of course, we have more colors than just that, but it starts to look more like a cartoon look now. The only area that doesn't look super cartoony to me right now is the dress is very textured in a realistic way. So once again, I would maybe do something with that. But we can see that the texture itself is reacting to the lighting, though, in the realistic way that the original dress texture did. So that's especially apparent in the belt area, which looks like it's made out of a satin or something, where yeah, you can see that.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, I guess her skin sort of has that effect too. It's sort of the color clamping type of look. But we also have this interesting effect on the side, kind of going down the center sort of her thigh. We've got this distinction of color there where the light is hitting the front of the dress and then changing to sort of a darker blue color there.
Yeah. I actually quite like it. I don't mind. Like I think that the unless you're going for a strict cartoon look where it's a cell shade of 5 colors, I don't mind the texture on the dress. I could totally buy that as a cartoony kind of a character. And bearing in mind that this is really low resolution. This is not high resolution at all. This is a really small image. So even we're getting a bit of jaggies here, but that's only because we're running out at a small resolution.
Right. I think we also are missing some of our outlines here. It looks like we don't have our color ID outlines in there either. The full color image is the topmost layer right now. Yeah.
So
There we go. Except for we've got a different image in there that's got the lines from the color clamping in there. I think it's the color cam lines near the top there. I think we just need to take that one out. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. All right. So yeah, so once we add in the other lines like the color ID lines and the Fresnel and the edge blend and stuff, it starts looking like a pretty convincing cartoon image. And you can get away with a lot, I think, just using the tune camera if you're okay having not ultra fine control on your materials and letting the 3D light engine sort of approximate your color blending and make it kind of a tune look. So I have gotten decent results. As we can see, we're kind of getting decent results. But I do find there are certain limitations, especially if things like the dress texture end up bothering you because it's not simple enough, then you have to go to changing your textures in order to get a look that's more what you're after, I guess. All right, so that being said, let's hop back to Daz Studio and talk a little bit more about the Tune two-tone camera now that we have a better idea of what the Tune camera does by itself. So the Tune two-tone camera will first do a tune render, sort of like what we just did, in that it will simplify the colors. It will blend the colors together, and it will do it based on the clamping and the clamp blending parameters that we have set. Of course, we don't really see it because it immediately afterwards converts it to two colors based on the threshold that is in the two-tone parameters group.
So, can I ask a question then here? So the Tune two-tone cam and the Tune cam are two entirely different cameras that have two entirely different parameters or render based on two entirely different parameters, even though they are using the same terminology and quite possibly the same kind of algorithms. So if we look at the Tune two-tone cam, we have Tune in the parameters down here, which has clamps and clamp blend, although it's set to 3 and 0.2. Whereas if we click on the Tune cam, we know that we set the clamps and clamp blend to 2 and 0.3. So the values are not the same, but they do a similar job. Am I oversimplifying?
The two cameras are very, very similar to one another. You can think of the Tune two-tone camera as almost exactly the same thing as the Tune camera, except for after it does the Tune camera render, it then converts the resulting image to a black and white.
Okay.
And it does it based on the color threshold. So on the Tune two-tone camera and the two-tone parameter group, that's where we have that grayscale threshold, I think is the name of the property, and that determines what your resulting color will end up being.
So this is a Tune two-tone cam within the script. And this is the Tune cam within the script.
Yeah, so the script is using whatever settings you have set for, well, most of your scene. The cameras are some of the things in your scene. So the properties that you set for your cameras in the scene are honored by the script. The script, the LR9K auto render script, is really only going to be changing certain parameters in the rendering engine, in the rendering script. So if you notice all those line render 9000 render properties, those are all settings and render settings. So
Okay.
So for example, if you wanted to, you could certainly have multiple cameras in your scene to get different effects, and then the render script is going to honor it. So you could rename the cameras to be whatever you want them to be named, and set the properties differently for each one if you want to. So let's say, for example, that you got good line settings with an edge blend that had certain properties and certain settings in the LR9K auto render. You could have two instances of the edge blend camera in your scene with different settings and different properties on the cameras themselves.
So how would I just add another camera and call it another edge blend and change the parameters within LR9K or within the parameters tab on the ADAS?
Well, it's two different things. Most of the cameras don't have a lot of settings that we really want to play with, although we do get a lot of different and drastic effects from changing the parameters on the tune cameras, as we just saw, right? If we play with clamps and clamp blend, then we get a drastically different effect. So in those cases, the settings are only controlled on the cameras themselves. It has very little to do with the LR9K auto render. Auto render is just changing to that camera and clicking the render button for us automatically.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah, so for science, let's do another render of the tune camera, and let's turn off the lights checkbox in DAZ, or in LR9K auto render.
All right. Tune camera, set to go.
So we got tune camera, render lights off. All right, let's give it a shot.
Blast off.
Yeah, don't bother with the lines, just dragging the tune camera, I guess it's tune camera 2 there. So it did render it all black, which is what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
So, okay, so yeah, we have to have the lines turned on. So if we wanted to affect the lighting in the scene, like so that the lighting wasn't so stark in the resulting image, then we would have to do that with affecting the light settings. So in this particular resulting image, we see very stark differences in color, right, where the light hits her compared to the fall off where the shadow starts. Or really what the tune render is doing is really drawing the highlights and then the normal tone. That's really what we're seeing. We're not really seeing shadows, we're seeing the highlights, the specular,
Right.
and the resulting image. And that's largely because we're using a spotlight, and the spotlight's going to be direct lights. This is the look of like direct sunlight versus a more distant light type of effect where it's more of a gradual lighting. So those effects will indeed change with the lighting setup of your scene, and the direction of the light and the intensity of the light and all of that.
Okay. Do you want to try an indirect light instead of a spotlight?
I don't know if we need to do that.
So as with the previous 2 sessions, we're going to break here and return on the final part of this series where we start to manipulate maps and materials in DAZ Studio. See you next time. Bye.